All right, I see folks coming in. We're going to start 3 minutes past our start time so that we can let folks trickle in. All right. Hello, beautiful people. How is everyone doing today? Thank you all so much for joining us. If this is your first session, welcome to the 2021 Gender Justice Conference. If you've been with us throughout yesterday and this morning's sessions, thank you so much for continuing on this journey with us today. My name is Jamie Peperato, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today's session. We joined today's conference with the intent to explore the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to engage in social justice work with a special focus on disrupting gender oppression. Thank you so much for being with us here today. You are currently in the session, Battery in the Workplace, a conversation about Black hair and non-consensual touching. Just a note, we will be recording this session. Currently, we are in a Zoom webinar, which means that your video will not be seen on the recording. However, your name may be visible during the session, so we invite you to change your Zoom name if needed. In addition, please note that we do not have an ASL interpreter for this session. However, captioning is available via Zoom during this session. I'd like to invite you at this time as well to change or use the rename function on Zoom to include your pronouns next to your name if you have not already. I want to give a shout out to Lindsay Mosvik, who will be doing who's the Zoom moderator for today. She will monitor the chat. If you have any questions about technology or how to access Zoom captioning, please use the chat and we'll do our best to answer your questions. In addition, Lindsay will help ensure that we are upholding our community agreement, which can be found in our conference support hub. If at any time you're in violation of our community agreement, you may be asked to leave. And I also want to make note that we will leave time at the end for a Q&A, so please submit your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. During our session, we understand that a journey through healing looks different for everyone, and we are committed to creating a safe virtual space for all of our audience members. With this consideration, we are aware that some of the topics that we will be covering today have the potential to be triggering and/or activating for our audience members as they relate to concepts of gender-based violence and harm, misogyny, racism, racist violence and harm, and examples of white supremacist violence. In our effort to support our audience members, we invite you to take a break, take a step back, and turn off your camera at any point during today's conversation. At this time, I have the absolute honor of introducing our presenter for today's session. We are joined here today by Tynslei Spence-Mitchell. Tynslei Spence-Mitchell centers her research on inequities in policy that affects marginalized communities, specifically as it relates to race, gender, and sexuality. Her work serves to challenge the status quo in social, professional, and educational spaces, holding steadfast to the belief that these systems can and should be disrupted. She holds a bachelor's in history from Rutgers University-Newark, a master's in criminology and justice from St. John's University, and is a public administration doctoral candidate here at Westchester University. Additionally, she holds a diversity and inclusion certification from Cornell University. And this New Jersey native enjoys reading memoirs, spending time with family, and watching Netflix. So at this time, I'd like to turn over the session to Tynslei. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And we're going to jump right in. This is a Battery in the Workplace, a conversation about natural hair and non-consensual touching. I do want to talk about this because we're going to discuss current protections against this transgression. And I refer to this act as a transgression because I don't believe there's anything micro about microaggressions, and I don't believe that we should continue to minimize harmful acts. I do want to say that there is a slide where the word rape is mentioned. So in case the subject is a trigger for anyone, I just want everyone to know going in. So this is the overview of some of the areas that I'm going to cover, and I hope everyone gets something out of it. I would like, if you're more comfortable engaging the chat during the presentation, that's cool too, feel free. So this is my hypothesis. I believe, and I will demonstrate today that this conversation is going to demonstrate how the touching of Black hair without consent is rooted in the historical othering of that hair texture, and how current shifts in organizational policies in the era of Me Too provide they can help restore and better correct these kind of transgressions. So what is battery? You've probably heard of this. Everyone particularly watches Law and Order, so you've heard of the word surely. But legally definition, battery is defined as harmful or offensive contact with another person without consent. Now, there are two definitions of battery because the act exists both as a civil offense, which is the tort law, and as a criminal one. And some states actually don't even have a criminal battery charge. When a state doesn't have a criminal battery charge, sometimes they default to assault, but assault has a different definition. Assault is the threat of imminent harm. An example of this would be me saying, I'm going to slap you. That is assault because I'm threat of slapping you. If I actually slap you and you didn't consent to the touch, obviously, that's battery. So there's two different things. Pennsylvania is one of those states that does not have a battery charge in the criminal sense. So if a person were to experience battery and no criminal charges were filed, then, you know, the move for if they were to seek recourse, they may want to continue it in civil court for damages. And I thought it was important to include these definitions because anytime I refer to non-consensual touching in any capacity, I'm calling it what it is, battery. So let's talk about history and policy for a second. Non-consensual contact with Black bodies is ingrained in American history. White supremacist ideologies have permitted the belief that people can just touch Black people without question. And a common belief like that was purported throughout slavery, the Black codes, and beyond. When colonists would attempt to purchase enslaved people, they would inspect them kind of like the way we inspect things when we shop. They would check their teeth, they would check their genitals and other parts of their bodies before bidding on them. So this immediate contact is just something that it was as American as apple pie. The gendered impact on Black women is vast, as stereotypes surrounding the sexuality of Black girls and women permit many to believe that all contact with them is consensual, because historically consent was never necessary. This belief was used to justify the rape of Black women by all men for generations. I do want to add that I don't believe that everybody who commits battery towards a Black person is a white supremacist, but I will say that the belief that a person can and should touch a Black body without consent is rooted in the socialized belief of Black people having limited autonomy. And that belief comes from white supremacist ideals. Now, for this research, I've read several articles, I've read several studies, and where people documented the battery that they experienced from non-Black people regarding their hair. In one study, 42% of Black girls and one Black male reported non-consensual touching based on curiosity surrounding their hair texture, with the children reporting the following: people just touching their hair all the time, just putting their hands in it, and just reaching out and touching it. Now, applying intersectional framework, this is racially gendered transgression, and it's also what's rooted in what Bell Hooks calls the politic of domination. This is the intersectional axes of race, class, and gender oppression. So women and non-men from marginalized communities, they never just experience one. It's an amalgamation of both or all at the same time, and as we can see from this study specifically, this is a very gendered experience for Black girls and women that lasts from youth and starts in youth and lasts well into adulthood. This framework actually explains why Greg is the only male student that reported this in the sample. At some point, due to patriarchy, Greg will phase out of being touched without his consent. But because Black women never experience both racism and sexism simultaneously, that day will never come for them. I always find that visual impacts work well. So I'm always on Twitter, and I wanted to share something with you that I saw online. This is a series of unfortunate events. The poster, she posted this, and also check the date. It was as recent as last year. And these are the pictures, just in case you can't see it. So this is the first one, the second one, and the third one. While taking photos with a friend, battery was committed on the unsuspecting poster. The shock on her face is evident because, as you can see, she was touched without her consent. I do want to bring your attention to the batterer's arm is already extended upon approach, making contact with the poster's hair and subsequent body before addressing her directly. I think that regardless of someone's identity, non-consensual touching is pervasive. And for many women with textured hair, specifically Black women, this experience is all too common. So why do people want to touch it? I don't know, everyone. I don't know why every single person might want to touch it, but I'm going to default to what the scholars have said on the subject. There are stereotypes that exist about Black hair that are rooted from slavery, and they address this specific type of battery directly. Scholars Bird and Tharps believe that the historical social othering of Black people contributed to the fascination of non-Black people with Black hair. But Black hair is experienced in the Western Hemisphere politicization. And in that politicization has enshrouded it with mystery to outsiders. For generations, Black people, especially Black women, were forced to hide their hair under scarves or kerchiefs while being enforced servitude. And then during the mid to late 20th century, we see the hair becoming more visible in cultural styles like cornrows, afros, locks, and everything else. It's also important to talk about how this othering has been institutionalized. Every August and September, Black students face suspension or expulsion at the beginning of each school year for wearing their hair as it naturally grows or in a particular hairstyle, with many schools stating that those hairstyles violate the policies on neat or clean hair. And several states have even had to pass the Crown Act, which helps prevent hiring bias against Black women specifically, but Black people overall, because ideals like the one mentioned here from the Glamour editor serve as barriers for employees in the workplace. People who wear cultural hairstyles are often not promoted, passed over, not hired, and face different types of discrimination than those of the same race who may wear their hair straightened. And I do want to bring your attention to what the Glamour editor said in 2007, that in the office style, say no to the fro, dreadlocks are dreadful, and the office was not a place for political hairstyles. And upon further research, I remembered looking that up. She's made that statement at the law firm Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton. And she made it that spring of that year. And that fall, I worked in that New York office where that statement was made. So that just gives you an idea of just how much of the culture against Black hair is ingrained in policy. But it definitely also speaks to the fact that in many spaces, as we saw with the person in the social at the restaurant, and also within many institutions, Black people have their hair touched without their consent, and curiosity as a causal factor for battery is still never appropriate. So how does the Me Too movement assist in combating this battery? Just the simultaneous Me Too and Time's Up movement, conversations about consent have become a national dialogue. And as such, workplaces have tightened up their anti-discrimination and sexual harassment policies. And since previous policies have failed to sufficiently deal with the workplace harassment, employers have introduced more mandatory trainings that emphasize prevention and conduct. As these organizations continue to strengthen their policies against battery and sexual harassment in specific words, this is an opportune time for policy to be applicable to this type of specific battery that people may experience at work. So I also hope that as more dialogue surrounds cultural competency continues in various spaces, people will take the time to educate themselves on the effects of racialized and gendered transgressions. Until that time comes, I believe that the Me Too era was one of the best things to happen for women in marginalized communities, because so many policies are being updated because of this public outcry. And for these groups, policy means protections, and any incremental step forward is long overdue, no matter how small. So what can you do if this is happening in the workplace or you see it done? Report it to HR. Thanks to stricter language around sexual harassment in employee handbooks, I believe that this kind of battery should be reported to your human resources team. Language in employee handbooks are now more expansive than ever due to the Me Too movement. And instead of saying things like, we don't permit sexual harassment, organizations are now defining what sexual harassment is, and also detailing specifically non-consensual contact. Because of the Me Too movement, I think that many organizations are developing anti-harassment policies in conjunction with their sexual harassment policies. And asking them to enforce their own regulations is not unethical, so report it. I also checked out SHRM's stance on this, because this organization usually is the cutting edge of human resource policy, and they create a lot of policy templates for HR professionals, and their recent anti-harassment templates have sections on specifically for non-consensual touching that exists outside of sexual harassment. And on another note, I also think it's important to report this kind of aggression, because many organizations say that they're committed to inclusion, and battery works in opposition of that. The commitment to preventing battery should not only be applicable to in the sexual harassment space. So this is my conclusion. And I just want to close and leave everyone with some final thoughts that all types of battery definitely should be reported in the workplace, especially if it violates your employer's anti-harassment policy or other policies on non-consensual touching. And lastly, I do want to say that during the social movements of the civil rights era in the 1960s, legislators realized that society makes cultural shifts around policy. You can't ban racism, but we can ban hiring discrimination, you can ban redlining, you can ban sex and gender-based discrimination in institutions, things like that. And one of the goals of policy and legislation at that time wasn't the hope that if you ban it in these institutions, then hopefully it will trickle out into society and create a cultural shift. That hasn't happened, but having it in specific institutions has created a start, and it did assist in certain cultural shifts as it came to the being more open towards other races. Even if it doesn't stop racism, it has, I won't say it has curbed it, but it curbed the type that people experience. And I think that by applying these policies to the experience of battery in the workplace, hopefully this can assist in the socialization of stop touching people without their consent. And this is my information if anybody wants it. And this is limited references. If you want more references or want to see anything that I have used in regards to this presentation, you can shoot me an email, that's fine. But I also want to open up for different questions pretty soon, because I think it's important to talk about this and refer to this act of aggression as what it is. So I'm going to stop my share, but thank you for listening.
Tynslei, thank you so much. We have some questions coming in. I just want to pause for a moment and encourage folks who are on the call to submit your questions in the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. I'm not sure where I am on your screen, but it should be down there. I have a couple of questions that came in, and I'll start with the first one. Tynslei, in terms of the young folks in our life, and this question it is multifaceted, right? Because it depends on identity, specifically it depends on race, but in terms of our young people in our life, how do we go about engaging in conversations to prevent harm from happening or address it if it does happen to someone, specifically in terms of if someone's hair is being touched and or if someone is touching someone else's hair without consent?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's important to talk about what non-consensual touching is, not just sexually based, but just period. You have the right to your own autonomy. No one has the right to touch you without, or any part of your body without consent. I think that explanations like these lie within the same space. When you have those conversations, I think that a lot of times, because of Me Too, we focused it a lot on inappropriate touching, and we've created this bubble of what inappropriate touching is, and it's related to your sexual organs, and it's not. Inappropriate touching is someone touching you and you didn't want to be touched. That's it, period. So I think that this space to have these kind of conversations exists in that, and instead of putting what non-consensual touching is in that space, in that small bubble, really expand it to be what it is in its true definition. So the same way we tell people, don't touch that, don't do this, keep your hands to yourself, it's the same conversation. I don't think there's a space that we need to compartmentalize it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have another question coming in from Brianna Banks. What legal reform would you like to see regarding touching people's hair without their consent? Do you see a Title VII amendment that provides a cause of action when HR declines to act? Or do you see a specific change to states' battery laws where individuals can bring claims in tort?
I do believe that I hate to sound super pessimistic, but legislators do not like touching Title VII, because for them, Title VII was all encompassing when it was created. So the fact that we're seeing now when people are discussing what it actually means, there was I think there's going to be hesitation as it relates to that. However, I think that states policies can really address these kind of things. We see that with the passage of the Crown Act. And though the Crown Act is not national, I believe California has passed it, New York has passed it, New Jersey has passed it, and a few other states. I think there are 7 in total. But we're seeing the national dialogue about how hair-based discrimination exists in employment. And I think that on the state level, on the local level, the change can be made there to address those battery issues. I think that in having those state and local protections, that might open up a lot of space for future litigation for battery and what that means. But again, as we see, I believe that just putting it in a microcosm of what is considered non-consensual touching and the word consent being, I guess, associated with sexual contact only, as long as the conversations are more expansive and inclusive of what it truly is by its definition, I think that we can really see change on the state and local level just to address that experience for many people.
Awesome. Thanks, Tynslei. I have another question. What policies or training could higher ed institutions like Westchester employ to bring attention to this form of battery in particular?
Great. I think that this should be a part of Westchester's conversations around consent and battery, as well as an expansive and in specific words, expansive and specific area in their anti-harassment statement. I think to touch someone without their consent in any capacity, sexual or otherwise, is pervasive and harassing. I think that that's something that can be included in trainings. I don't think that everyone knows that this is battery. And I think that when we call it what it is, and we say what words are and what words mean, there isn't a bit of secrecy around it. And then just, you can really enforce what the organizations or the institution's policies are toward combating battery in any capacity. So I believe that this should be have its own section in the anti-harassment statement. And especially with now with Me Too protections and more organizations revisiting that. Previous years, organizations would say, oh, no sexual harassment, we don't condone that. But now, as I mentioned with SHRM's policies and template, they're saying sexual harassment includes non-consensual contact, kissing, touching, tickling, and they're going through and they're having all of these different things of what it could and couldn't be. I think that that should also exist. Say non-consensual contact is touching someone's hair without their consent. Say that too. And that's it. There's so many spaces now for it to easily be rectified. And I think that it's important that organizations be very mindful of that, especially as the topic of consent is very important to them. So yeah, I think they don't have much more to do if they're already doing the work to prevent sexual harassment.
Tynslei, in your research, have you found specific language and/or specific practices that have been really beneficial in helping cultivate a environment, a community, a culture that is more equitable and just in terms of this?
Equitable, I would say, some of my research determined that zero tolerance policies were equitable, but I don't believe that I believe the zero tolerance policies as it relates to this kind of battery are important, but I don't believe that they also create space for people to develop, because some people don't know that this is an act of aggression. And even if you're limited amount of knowledge on if it is an act of aggression. Even if you don't know, that does not take away from the fact that it is one. I also think that often what a lot of organizations are doing now, especially since the racial uprising of last year, is that if an act of aggression is reported, then everyone has to do training. And I don't believe that. I don't agree with that at all. I think that the person who committed the act of aggression needs to be trained. But if I am someone who experienced it, why do I have to sit through it? So I think that a lot of organizations are still developing that equitable space as it relates to this. But again, I believe that the root of it is truly starting with proper training. I don't believe that many people see this act of aggression as battery in the same sense of if someone were to grab someone's breast or other parts. So I think that that area needs to be inclusive of just how much do you need to keep your hands to yourself. Let's keep your hands to yourself. This is what this means. This doesn't mean. I think that if organizations were able to find their grounding in that, or as I like to say, you know how you used to play hide and go seek when you were a kid and everybody needed to be on home base? Everyone needs to start on home base when it comes to creating policies like that. Some people on first, some people on third, some people hiding behind the tree. No one's where they should be. But if everyone starts in the same place, then we can build from that. So I think that it's really important for them to find that footing and know where to build so they can truly address inequities and aggressions as they arise and in a more efficient manner.
Great, thank you, Tynslei. I have another question. So we know that expanding laws, and particularly criminal laws, are often disproportionately used against folks of color. Are there ways to ensure that would not be the case if this form of battery receives wider recognition legally?
Would you mind repeating that?
Of course, absolutely. So we know that expanding laws, in particular criminal laws, are often disproportionately used against folks of color. Are there ways to ensure that would not be the case if this form of battery receives wider recognition legally?
Unfortunately, no. I think that what we would be able to see is a very gendered outcome because women and non-men would be able to better report any and all types of these acts of aggressions. And I believe that they would be better investigated. But I can't say that true equity would be there because true equity is not 100% in the law right now as far as its application. So, but it's all about the implementation truly. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I really talk about this happening in the workforce, because as employers, yeah, they have to enforce federal, state, local laws like that, but they also have their own organizational policies. And I think that the best place now for them to develop it is in these organizational policies. We can't stop things happening socially in the streets the same way that as far as the experience of transgressions as it relates to hair battery. An example of this is what I shared with the person having lunch. There was no way that she could have prevented that. There was no way because it was an uncontrolled environment. But when you have an office space, which isn't a controlled environment, you have an institution, which is a controlled environment, I think the best place is to start there. And then we can grow out and we can see how we can apply this on a local scale, a state scale, and then move legally. But because there are already policies in place that protect people from non-consensual contact, I think that it's really important for institutions to enforce those.
Thanks, Tynslei. I have another question that came in.
Yeah.
In places without specific language around this kind of battery, do you have recommendations for advocating for this kind of policy change?
Oh, for sure. Hopefully, I recently learned that a lot of organizations being, small businesses or independent businesses don't really have human resources teams. And then also many members of marginalized communities don't feel safe with human resources because human resources often enforces policies that are that may oppress them in some specific ways or in their roots. So I think that organizations now being more open, the best thing that can be done is to have human resource professionals, hopefully, if they're, members of SHRM, look to see, always read the employee handbook. That's one thing that I learned early on in my career, is to always read the employee handbook. They give it to you, and I personally believe they hope you don't read it, but I believe that I'm going to help you enforce your own policies, because I work here just as much as you work here, and no one wants to go to court, neither you nor me. So I think that asking, especially now, post 2020, asking for anti-harassment policies, asking for what your organization does for for sexual harassment, asking to see these things and to show these things, because everyone has a diversity statement, but let's see what you're actually doing. Organizations usually know how to start there. And because many organizations have revisited and done these policies on their own, I think that just ask to see where they are and see what applies to you. But to default to some, my answer, read that employee handbook, because there may be something in there that already applies and you don't know that you're already covered.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have a couple more questions that came in. How do you think that implementing training regarding touching one's hair will change the way employees think about boundaries? And how can we encourage other states to apply the Crown Act?
Okay. I'll do the tail end. First question. The Crown Act, actually, the legislation is ongoing. So if you go to their website, they did a whole study with Dove, and you can actually, there's so many people you can contact, grassroots organizations, legislators who, you are assisting with the Crown Act in its implementation on a national scale. Now, some states have not passed the Crown Act, but what they are doing is that in certain jurisdictions or certain localities are passing Crown Acts. So you can just see what is applicable, reach out to legislators. Just on their website, they have a bunch of information. If you Google the Crown Act and Dove, it should come right up. I know states like Kentucky has a city where there is a that has applied the Crown Act, but the state does not recognize it. So we do see this, even if the state isn't there, certain localities are implementing it. And for the other question, is implementing training will change about boundaries. I think that implementing training will, I don't think it'll change boundaries. I think it'll enforce them. I think that these are boundaries that should have always been enforced. And the fact that organizations are late to the game as far as updating previous sexual harassment policies and non-consensual contact policies for to protect their employees just shows how much they did not work previously. So because they've been updating them since 2015, 2016, and mind you, to prevent their own litigation, not because they thought it was finally deserved, because if they wanted you to have it, you'd have it. But just, I think that enforcing these boundaries about non-consensual contact are definitely going to just highlight the fact that people come to work to work. People don't come to work to have their braids touched. People don't come to work to have someone reach into their scalp. And also, one of my statistics, I know this may be a tangent, but it's related to the pandemic. 66% of people don't wash their hands when they leave the bathroom. Would you want someone to touch your scalp when there's a chance? Yeah, no, that's inappropriate. It's nasty. And just, now we see the effects of a movement to wash your hands and keep 6 feet. But this is something that Black people and people with textured hair have always experienced. I remember the first time someone touched my hair was in middle school, and I just thought it was weird. And if I was talking to a friend about this and asked me, well, when has it stopped? And then I said, what I think the more appropriate question is, when did I stop it? Because it hasn't, the attempt has not stopped. And I think that when organizations realize that there are, unfortunately, no matter what, you are going to be the savior and the villain. This is an oppressive structure. You need to center and enforce policies that keeps your employees from being oppressed in your space, at least. If that's all that you can control your space. So trainings are the best things to provide, give information on what is what is covered, and also encouraging your employees to read the handbook as well, because they're held to the policy. You should know what's in it. So I think that that's all to some. It's just all about enforcing the boundaries that are already written in the policy anyway.
Great, thank you, Tynslei. I have another question that came in. This question says, curious if your research indicated if this type of harm was experienced differently for folks who had additionally or compounding historically marginalized identities, such as queer and trans folks or folks with disabilities or other folks who might experience marginalization.
Not specifically. When I continued going into the breakdown of the information, I didn't really break it down to find out about what was needed as it relates to the different marginalized groups. So one thing that I really enforced was just racial breakdown, racial information, and racial things. I didn't go any further, but I think it truly had to relate to textured hair that were, three, I don't know if anyone knows the textured hair breakdowns, but type 3 and type 4 specifically face that. Also, the study that I shared, it also included Black people who had more finer hair. They also experienced this kind of transgression too, because then it's the presumption that, but you're Black, how is your hair straight? Or you're Black, why is your hair curly? What are you? Are you just Black, or is there something else? That kind of dialogue also contributes to historic othering that Black people have experienced in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tynslei. I have another question that came in. For folks who are trying to educate others or who may be ignorant in particular of this type of battery, do you have recommendations of specific examples like media or stories or folks who are doing this type of advocacy work that they could use in their own advocacy work?
No, I usually default, honestly, as a doctorate student, I'm just peer journaled out. So I'm not on the gram. I'm not on, following people. I can't answer that. But what I can say is keep your hands to yourself. The kindergarten rules still apply. We say please, we say thank you. Keep your hands to yourself. And that's really it. If someone is, or if you see someone trying to touch someone's hair, it's pervasive. It is pervasive. Non-consensual contact is just that. I also believe that it's important to analyze that if someone does want to touch someone's hair, why? For what reason? Do you want to see what it feels like? Why? I also think there are certain things that when we are children, we learn a lot about dinosaurs. We learn so many different periods. My favorite dinosaur is the Stegosaurus, always has been, always will be. I have never touched a Stegosaurus. So my curiosity about doing that still has not permitted me to do so. So again, curiosity is not a causal behavior for battery. Just keep your hands in your pocket.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tynslei. I have a question in terms of, before I do that, one more question came in. From your deep dive into the research, what areas would you like to see further explored related to this form in particular of battery?
Just how much it's a gendered experience for people. I think, and to the point with the study with Greg being the only student that reported this kind of contact, but 42% of all girls experience this. I really just want this to be something that demonstrates the gendered impact of how Black women and girls experience this for the rest of their lives. They don't get an opportunity to phase out the way Greg does. And I also think that we should examine just the type of roots and the misogyny that comes from it. And it's not just misogyny because there's a chance that it may come from white men or non-Black men or whomever, but often in my personal experience, it was white women who tried to touch my hair and would often compliment it, but in complimenting it, they had to touch it, which is not how things work. We compliment, you go to the museum, you don't touch the painting. It's still a Picasso. And not to say I am a Picasso, but but I think that we should talk about how much of a gendered the experience, the gendered impact that this has on women and girls for their entire lives, and this social othering that is that continues. I think it's also another space to have conversations about consent, and when we're touching women and non-men without their permission, and what that's rooted in. And I believe so the racialized and the gendered impact that this has should definitely be deeper dived into. But I think that's really important to discuss.
Tynslei, as you were just explaining that, this particular conversation makes me think of all of the different opportunities and avenues that we just as individuals, but also people in our individual fields, right? Like whether it's higher ed, whether it's public administration, whether it's a teacher, whether et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and how many opportunities we have to ensure that we're having conversations that talk about this type of harm, and ensuring, especially with the younger folks within our life, that we are providing opportunity regardless of our race, about making opportunity and space and having conversations about the impact, right? There's so much opportunity. I have more of a personal conversation or personal question, Tynslei, for you in particular. Yeah. What's the next step in terms of your career as a doctorate student? Some of the research that you've been looking into. What is that next step in expanding or connecting it to kind of your next step?
Yeah. So one thing about me, I'm really supportive of DEI, and I believe that I don't believe that without true knowledge cannot come without education. So one thing that I do focus a lot of my research on is inequities, that's related to race and gender and sexuality. And I like to, in public administration and public policy, examine where marginalized communities fall through the gaps and what that really means on existing laws. Because if the law did everything, it wouldn't need to be revamped and revitalized every few months or every few years. So yeah, hopefully, if I get this dissertation done, I can, graduate, of course, and take a break. But I really want to work on transforming inclusive and making organizations and nonprofits, private sector, just more inclusive and as inclusive as they would like to be. I think that a lot of the work that comes from that in organizational change really starts with an examination of policy and what it does do and who it's really for and how does it do that. So that's what I hope to do, if, dissertation pending.
You will do it.
Yeah.
Soon to be doctor, soon to be doctor out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying.
Yes. So I want to, I know we're coming close to the end of time. And so for our participants, if there's any last questions that you have, I want to provide space and opportunity for that, so that we can get everyone their answers and all of that knowledge and information. But Tynslei, I want to just express how much I appreciate you bringing this conversation. I have a 3.5, almost 4-year-old, I can't believe it, at home. And I am constantly thinking, and my partner and I are constantly having conversations about how we can do better and how we can have conversations that that better help dismantle some of these harms that exist by purely race, hate, right, oppression, and then in terms of having conversations, right, to provide the opportunity for that knowledge of learning and growing. And so I'm already starting to think about how do my partner and I have these conversations with our little one, and ensuring and connecting it to your point around consent and what that means, in general, at the larger picture as well. And so thank you so much for bringing this important conversation to us.
You're welcome.
So with that being said, Tynslei, seeing no other questions, I do want to, again, thank you so much for bringing all of the brilliance and the knowledge that you brought here today. Words can't describe how appreciative we are. I want to thank the participants. I want to thank everyone for their time and energy and commitment to gender justice as well. We will be sending out an evaluation to everyone via email. And so please, as you're going through your days and kind of sitting with this information, please keep watch for that evaluation as well, and provide us your feedback. At this point, thank you, Lindsay. Lindsay's just pulled up the QR code. If folks are here who need to record your attendance in this session, please feel free to scan that QR code at this time. We also want to make note, and we hope that you join us for our next session. Our next session is our faculty spotlight session on Muslim women's rights, unpacking a hegemonic liberal secular framework. And so we hope that everyone can join us for that session as well as our other sessions today. And to learn more about those sessions, I'd encourage you to check out our conference support hub, which has all the information you need for today. But soon to be, Dr. Tynslei Spence-Mitchell, thank you again so much, and we appreciate your time with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I appreciate all of it. And if you have any questions, you can email me. That's totally fine.
Thank you, Tynslei.
Bye, everyone.